I was locked on a ship with an alien woman, and she was the most beautiful alien woman in the galaxy. Cooper was elbow deep in a crate of synthetic protein bars when the universe decided to ruin his afternoon. The klaxons started screaming first, that particular pitch that made his teeth ache and his survival instincts kick into overdrive. Then came the AI's voice, smooth as glass and twice as cold. Hull breach detected in Sector 7. Emergency protocols engaged. Lockdown initiated. The cargo bay doors slammed shut with the kind of finality usually reserved for coffin lids in bad relationships. "Oh, come on," Cooper said to nobody in particular, watching the massive hydraulic seals engage with a hiss that sounded almost apologetic. "I was supposed to be off shift in 20 minutes. He pulled his arm out of the crate, clutching a protein bar that claimed to taste like actual chicken. The label was lying. It had been lying for 3 years across 17 star systems. But Cooper had developed a working theory that if you ate it fast enough and thought about something else, you could almost convince yourself it wasn't terrible. That's when he noticed he wasn't alone. Hazel stood near the cryo containers on the far side of the bay, one hand resting on the frost-covered metal, looking like some kind of avant-garde sculpture titled "Woman Contemplating Cold Storage." The emergency lighting painted everything in shades of crimson and shadow, but somehow she seemed to collect all the available light and reflect it back in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. Her skin had this quality like brushed silver, and those ears, those impossibly elegant ears that swept back from her face, caught the light at their edges. Cooper had heard the stories. Everyone had. The Centauri ambassador, who'd supposedly started a diplomatic incident over seating arrangements at a state dinner, just to be closer to her. The hollow artist, who'd spent his entire fortune trying to capture her likeness, and failed over and over until he gave up and became a monk on one of Jupiter's moons. The freight captain who'd rerouted an entire shipment of terraforming equipment, adding 3 weeks to the journey, because she'd mentioned she wanted to see the rings of Saturn at dawn. And now she was here, approximately 15 meters away, equally trapped. "Well," Hazel said, her voice cutting through the dying echo of the klaxons, "this is inconvenient." Cooper made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been his brain short-circuiting. He settled on words. "Yeah, inconvenient. That's one way to put it." She turned to face him fully, and Cooper discovered that violet eyes were apparently a real thing, and not just something romance writers made up. "How long do these lockdowns usually last?" 12 hours minimum, he managed, trying to sound professional, and not like someone who'd just forgotten how breathing worked. "The AI won't release the seals until it's confirmed the breach is sealed and atmospheric pressure is stable throughout the ship." 12 hours. She said it the way someone else might say, "heat death of the universe." Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not a delicate musical laugh either, but something genuine and a little exasperated. Of course it's 12 hours. I had a date." Cooper blinked. "You had a date?" "Well, a virtual date, with my sister on Thessia Prime. We were going to watch that new documentary about the Andromeda colony ships." She walked over to a supply crate and sat down on it with the kind of grace that made it look like she'd choreographed the movement. "She's going to think I stood her up." "I was supposed to argue with engineering about the gravity settings," Cooper offered, because apparently his mouth had decided to operate independently of his brain. "They're .03 off standard again. 3rd time this month." Hazel's eyes lit up with something that looked dangerously like amusement. .03? Most people wouldn't even notice that. Most people don't spend 8 hours a day moving cargo. You notice when the containers feel wrong. He realized he was still holding the protein bar and held it up like evidence. "Also affects the settling rate of granular materials in storage. Throws off the whole inventory system." "You're Cooper, aren't you?" She tilted her head slightly, those long ears shifting with the movement. "You argued with Captain Drexel about it last week in the mess hall. I was 3 tables over." The fact that she knew his name, that she'd been close enough to hear him complain about calibration standards, that she'd apparently filed this information away somewhere in her brain, it all hit him with the force of a small asteroid. Yeah, that was me. Sorry if I was loud." "Don't apologize. It was the most interesting conversation I'd heard in weeks." She pulled out a data pad from her flight suit pocket and glanced at it. "No signal, of course. The lockdown cuts communications to prevent contamination spread if there's a biological element to the breach. Cooper walked over to the comm panel on the wall, more out of habit than hope, and pressed the emergency contact button. Static greeted him, followed by the AI's pre-recorded message about remaining calm and awaiting further instructions. He turned back to Hazel, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "So," he said, committing fully to the surreal nature of the situation, "do you actually like those Andromeda documentaries? Or is that just a cover story for a much more exciting secret life?" She smiled, and Cooper felt something in his chest do a complicated maneuver that definitely wasn't covered in any medical textbook. "Oh, I'm absolutely fascinated by colony ship logistics. The resource management alone is incredible. Do you know they carried 17,000 different seed varieties? And the water reclamation systems were so efficient they achieved 99.7% recovery rates." Cooper found himself grinning despite the situation. "That's actually impressive. Our ship manages about 83% on a good day." "I know," Hazel said. "I checked the engineering reports. You could improve it by adjusting the condenser temperature in the aft recycling units." "You read our engineering reports?" "I read everything when I'm bored, and space travel is, unfortunately, very boring most of the time." She gestured at the cargo bay around them. "At least until you get locked in storage with a stranger for 12 hours. "Well," Cooper said, settling onto a crate opposite her, "we should probably introduce ourselves properly then. I'm Cooper, pedantic complainer about gravity settings and apparently terrible at picking shift times." "Hazel," she said, extending her hand across the gap between them, "engineering enthusiast and documentary addict." He shook her hand, noting that her skin was warm and her grip was firm, and that absolutely none of the stories had mentioned how normal she felt, how real, how completely unlike a myth. The ship hummed around them, indifferent to their predicament. Somewhere in Sector 7, repair drones were probably already sealing whatever tiny puncture had triggered this whole mess. The AI would take its time, run its diagnostics, follow its protocols with mechanical precision. Cooper looked at Hazel, who was looking back at him with something that might have been curiosity or might have been the beginning of something else entirely. 12 hours suddenly didn't seem quite long enough. The first hour crawled by with the speed of continental drift. Cooper had checked the emergency supply lockers twice, tested the manual override panel 3 times. It was, predictably, locked out during emergency protocols, and was now considering a 4th inspection of the fire suppression system just to have something to do with his hands. Hazel remained on her supply crate, occasionally swiping through her dead data pad out of what appeared to be pure habit. "You know," she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like taffy, "statistically speaking, we're probably safer in here than anywhere else on the ship right now." Cooper turned from the wall panel he'd been pretending to examine. "How do you figure?" "Hull breach is in Sector 7. We're in Sector 4. 3 bulkheads and approximately 80 meters of corridor between us and any actual danger." She gestured around the cargo bay. "Plus we have emergency oxygen reserves, water rations, enough protein bars to survive until the heat death of the universe, though whether we'd want to is another question. And those cryo containers could serve as emergency shelters if the life support fails." "You've really thought this through." "I think everything through. It's either a blessing or a curse depending on who you ask." She set down her data pad. "My sister says I should learn to be more spontaneous. Last week I color-coded my sock drawer by wavelength of visible light. She called it deeply concerning behavior." Cooper laughed despite himself. "I organized the cargo manifest by atomic weight of primary contents once. Captain Drexel made me undo it." "Why would he make you undo that? It's logical." "He said clients get confused when their shipment of titanium engine components is filed next to scandium medical implants, just because they're close on the periodic table." Cooper walked over and sat on the floor, leaning back against a container labeled freeze-dried vegetables, Mars origin. Apparently, the traditional system of sorting by destination and cargo type is supposed to make more sense. "Traditional systems are often inefficient," Hazel said, and slid down from her crate to sit on the floor across from him. "On Thessia Prime, we still use a calendar system based on our moon's orbital period, even though we've been a spacefaring civilization for 300 years. It made sense when we were planet-bound. Now, I need a conversion app just to schedule calls with people on standard galactic time. How long is a Thessian month? 47 standard days. Our year has 8 of them. She stretched her legs out in front of her. I missed my own birthday once because I forgot to convert the date. Spent the whole day working a double shift in the reactor maintenance bay, came back to my quarters, and found 17 messages from my family asking where I was. Reactor maintenance? I thought you were in... Cooper paused, realizing he had no idea what Hazel actually did on the ship. He'd been so busy not staring at her for the past 3 weeks that he'd never actually checked the crew manifest. Propulsion systems, she finished. I'm basically a glorified mechanic for the engines that keep us from drifting into the nearest star. It's not glamorous, but the machinery makes sense in a way people usually don't. Cooper absorbed this information, feeling something shift in his understanding. The stories about you never mention that you're an engineer. The stories about me are approximately 98% fiction and 2% wishful thinking. Hazel's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance or exhaustion. Last month, I overheard 2 crew members in the mess hall debating whether I was secretly royalty from some mysterious alien empire. I'm from a mining colony. My father operates heavy excavation equipment. My mother teaches primary school math to children who'd rather be anywhere else. That's actually much more interesting than secret royalty. You'd think so, but apparently normal person with a job doesn't make for compelling gossip. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that was startlingly casual. Do you know what the worst part is? People are always so disappointed when they actually meet me. I'm not mysterious or ethereal or whatever else they've built me up to be. I'm just someone who likes propulsion systems and documentaries and can't remember to call her sister on time. Cooper considered this. I don't think anyone talking to you right now is disappointed. You've known me for an hour and I've already told you about my color-coded socks. Give it time. I alphabetized my music collection by the artist's middle name once. Took me 3 days. Completely unusable system, but I committed to it anyway. Hazel's laugh was sudden and bright. Why their middle name? I got bored of normal alphabetization, wanted to see if it revealed any hidden patterns. He shook his head at the memory. It didn't. It just meant I could never find anything I wanted to listen to. Spent 20 minutes once trying to remember if the musician I wanted was filed under M for Marie or L for Lee. What happened to it? Still organized that way. I'm too stubborn to admit it was a terrible idea and change it back. I respect that level of commitment to a bad decision, Hazel said. On Thessia, we'd call that having the courage of your convictions, however misguided. Is that a compliment or an insult? Yes. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the ship's ambient hum filling the space between words. Cooper noticed that the emergency lighting had shifted slightly, cycling through its program routine. The red had faded to a dim amber that was marginally less apocalyptic. Can I ask you something? Hazel said, her tone shifting to something more careful. And you can tell me if it's too personal? Sure. Why are you on a merchant vessel? You clearly care about precision, about systems working correctly. You could be doing detailed work at a research station or calibration on one of the big colony ships. This seems like it would drive you crazy. Cooper picked at a loose thread on his uniform. It did for a while. I used to work at the Europa station in their atmospheric processing division. Everything was calibrated to .001 accuracy. It was perfect. It was also completely suffocating. What happened? I spent 3 years making sure the oxygen mixture was exactly right, the temperature was exactly right, the humidity was exactly right. Then one day I realized I hadn't actually looked out a viewport in 6 months. I was so focused on the systems I forgot why the systems mattered. He met her eyes. So I quit, signed on to the first merchant ship that would take me, and spent the next 2 years being annoyed at gravity settings and arguing with captains. But at least I remember to look out the windows now. Hazel nodded slowly. I think I understand that. Sometimes the imperfect thing is better than the perfect thing, because at least you're actually living in it. Exactly. Cooper surprised himself with how much he meant it. What about you? Why merchant vessels? I wanted to disappear for a while. She said it simply, without drama. Become part of the background, just another crew member doing their job. The Meridian's hope seemed about as unremarkable as it gets. Mission accomplished? Until about an hour ago, yes. The ship shuddered slightly, a small tremor that ran through the deck plating. Both of them tensed, but the AI's voice remained silent. After a moment, Hazel relaxed. Just the stabilizers compensating for the sealed bulkheads, she said, redistributing structural stress. We'll feel a few more of those over the next several hours. I love that you know that. I love that you noticed the gravity was 0.03 off. Cooper felt something warm unfold in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the cargo bay's life support system. We're both deeply weird, aren't we? Catastrophically so, Hazel agreed, and smiled at him like they were sharing a secret the rest of the galaxy would never understand. Hour 3 arrived with the kind of restless energy that made staying still feel impossible. Cooper had migrated to pacing the perimeter of the cargo bay, counting steps between containers out of a combination of boredom and the vague hope that physical movement might make time pass faster. It didn't, but at least it gave him something to do, besides think about how Hazel's laugh seemed to defy the acoustics of the metal chamber they were trapped in. Okay, Hazel announced from her position on the floor, where she'd sprawled out like someone trying to claim as much territory as possible. New game. We take turns inventing increasingly absurd ways we could escape the situation, and the other person has to explain why it wouldn't work. Cooper stopped mid-step. That sounds like a recipe for disappointment. That's the point. Embrace the futility. She gestured expansively. I'll start. We find the manual override panel, hotwire it using components from my datapad, and simply walk out. Already tried. The override is biometrically locked to senior officers during emergencies, and even if we could bypass that, the physical locking mechanism is mechanical. No amount of hot wiring changes the fact that there are literal steel bolts the size of my arm holding those doors shut. Cooper sat down against a container of what the manifest claimed was assorted textiles, but smelled suspiciously like mothballs. Your turn to propose something ridiculous. Ridiculous? I was being practical. Hazel propped herself up on her elbows. Fine. We use the emergency communicator to contact the bridge, explain we're trapped, and they override the lockdown remotely. The communicator is down. The lockdown protocol cuts all internal communications to prevent contamination spread if the breach has a biological component. We could be in here with some kind of alien parasite, and the AI would rather keep us contained than risk the whole ship. He paused. Also, we already tried that. Remember? Static and a pre-recorded message about remaining calm. I'm adding that to the test. You have to propose the solution before you can reject mine. That's not how you explain the rules. I'm clarifying them. Improvisational game design. She sat up fully, crossing her legs. Go ahead, your turn. Cooper thought for a moment. We activate the fire suppression system, which triggers a secondary emergency protocol that forces the doors to unseal for evacuation purposes. The fire suppression system in cargo bays uses inert gas displacement, not water or foam. It would suffocate us before the doors opened, and even if we survived, the AI would just detect that there's no actual fire and maintain the lockdown while we're unconscious from oxygen deprivation. Hazel grinned. Also, you damage whatever's in these containers. And I'm pretty sure at least 3 of them are carrying temperature-sensitive medical supplies that cost more than our combined annual salaries. How do you know what's in the containers? I read the manifest when on board, remember? There's 17 containers of medical supplies, 42 of general trade goods, 8 of agricultural equipment, and 1 marked fragile personal effects that I'm 90% certain is someone's illegal collection of Martian whiskey. Cooper felt his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. Illegal whiskey? Container 47, 3rd row from the back, the one labeled glassware and ceramics. The weight distribution is all wrong for actual glassware. I ran the numbers. She had the decency to look slightly sheepish. I was really bored during the last jump through hyperspace. And you didn't report it? Report what? My suspicions based on weight calculations that I absolutely shouldn't have been doing because I was supposed to be monitoring engine temperature fluctuations? She shook her head. Besides, whoever it belongs to has good taste. Martian whiskey is expensive. If they can afford to smuggle it, they can afford to enjoy it. Cooper sat with this information for a moment, then made a decision that was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. He stood up and walked toward the back of the bay, counting containers. "Third row from the back, you said? Cooper, what are you doing?" "Scientific investigation." He found container 47 and examined the electronic seal. Standard cargo lock, nothing sophisticated. He pulled out his maintenance override key, technically only supposed to be used for inspection purposes, but the manual was unclear about what constituted a legitimate inspection during emergency lockdown situations. The seal clicked open. Inside, nestled between carefully arranged padding that was definitely not standard packing material, were 6 bottles of amber liquid with labels that read, "Olympus Mons Reserve, 2,247. "Oh, that's the good stuff," Hazel said from directly behind him, making him jump. "That vintage won an award. They only produced 1,200 bottles. "How do you know that?" "My uncle collects whiskey. He talks about it incessantly at family gatherings. It's either learn about it or die of boredom during holiday dinners." She reached past him and carefully lifted one of the bottles. "The question is whether borrowing this qualifies as theft or emergency resource utilization." "Emergency resource utilization. We're trapped. Our mental health is deteriorating. Alcohol could be considered medicinal." She held up the bottle to the light. "Also, there's 6 bottles. If we only open one, and we're very careful with it, no one would even notice." Cooper knew he should say no. He should seal the container back up, return to sitting on the floor, and continue their absurd escape scenario game like a responsible crew member. Instead, he heard himself say, "Do you happen to know if there are any cups in the emergency supplies?" "There are collapsible cups in locker 3. I checked earlier." 5 minutes later, they were back in their spots on the floor, each holding a small amount of whiskey that had cost someone approximately half a month's salary per bottle. Cooper took a cautious sip and felt his entire understanding of alcohol reset itself. It was smooth and complex and tasted like someone had distilled a sunset. "This is dangerously good, he said. "Criminally good," Hazel agreed. "I'm pretty sure this is what people mean when they talk about the finer things in life." She took another sip, then fixed him with a look that was somewhere between serious and mischievous. "Okay, new game. We're drinking stolen whiskey in an emergency lockdown. We have to tell at least one truth we wouldn't normally admit." "That sounds like a terrible idea." "All the best ideas are terrible at first. That's how you know they're worth doing." She raised her cup slightly. "I'll go first. I volunteered for this assignment. The Meridian's Hope had an opening in propulsion systems, and I specifically requested transfer from the luxury liner I was working on before." "Why would you leave a luxury liner for this?" "Because on the luxury liner, people kept recognizing me. Passengers would ask for pictures. Other crew members would act weird around me. I couldn't just be an engineer fixing things. I had to be the engineer who also happened to be, quote, that stunning alien woman from the engine room." She swirled her whiskey. "Here, nobody cares. I'm just the person who keeps the engines running. It's wonderful." Cooper processed this, feeling something slot into place. "I dated someone for 6 months who never actually liked me. Her name was Mira. She liked the idea of me. Stable job, no drama, predictable schedule. But the actual me, the person who argues about gravity and organizes things in weird ways, she found that annoying. When she left for Ganymede, she said I was too ordinary to be interesting and too particular to be easy. She sounds exhausting. She was. I just didn't want to admit I'd wasted 6 months on someone who was fundamentally disappointed by who I was." He drank more whiskey, feeling it warm a path down his throat. "Your turn." "I haven't been on a date in 3 years. Not because no one's asked, but because I got tired of people who wanted to date the myth instead of me. It's easier to just not try." She met his eyes. "I told myself I was fine with it, but I don't think I am anymore." The cargo bay felt smaller suddenly, the space between them charged with something that hadn't been there before. Cooper opened his mouth to respond, but the ship chose that moment to shudder again, harder this time, and somewhere in the distance metal groaned against metal. They both froze, waiting. The AI's voice remained silent. After a long moment, Hazel let out a breath. "Just the stabilizers again," she said, but her voice was less certain than before. "Just the stabilizers," Cooper echoed, and took another drink of someone else's expensive whiskey, acutely aware that they still had 9 hours left and that he was beginning to hope the lockdown might last even longer. Hour 6 arrived with a pleasant haze that had less to do with the recycled air and more to do with the fact that they'd made significant progress through that bottle of Olympus Mons Reserve. Cooper had lost track of whose turn it was in their truth game, and frankly, he didn't care anymore. They'd migrated from sitting across from each other to sitting side by side against the container of freeze-dried vegetables, shoulders nearly touching, the bottle resting between them like a mediator in a very civilized negotiation. Okay, Hazel was saying, her words slightly looser than they'd been an hour ago. But if you could redesign the entire ship from scratch, what's the first thing you'd change? The gravity plating distribution, Cooper said immediately. It's uneven across decks. You can feel it if you pay attention. Deck 3 is 0.05 higher than Deck 2, which makes no sense from an engineering perspective and probably costs us extra power. See, I'd redesign the engine cooling system. We're using a 3-stage heat exchange that could easily be 2 stages with better radiator positioning. We're wasting approximately 8% efficiency just because someone 100 years ago decided that's how it should be done, and no one's bothered to update it. 8%? Cooper turned to look at her, genuinely outraged on behalf of efficiency everywhere. That's criminal. Have you proposed an update? Twice. Both times I was told that retrofitting would cost too much and we'd have to dry dock for 3 weeks. She took a sip of whiskey. Apparently saving 8% efficiency over the next decade isn't worth 3 weeks of lost revenue. I did the math. They're wrong, but no one wants to hear it. I believe you. And he did completely, which was probably the whiskey talking, but felt true anyway. You know what else is stupid about this ship? The emergency supply lockers are all keyed to the same access code, same code across the entire vessel. If someone figures out one locker, they've figured out all of them. Please tell me you're joking. 4792, every single one. Cooper gestured vaguely in the direction of the nearest locker. I checked when I first came aboard because I'm paranoid about emergency preparedness. It's been the same code for at least 5 years according to the maintenance logs. Hazel was quiet for a moment, then started laughing. Not a polite laugh, but something that built until she had to set down her cup to avoid spilling. We're trapped in a cargo bay, drinking stolen whiskey, complaining about engineering inefficiencies. This is either the saddest thing I've ever done or the best thing I've ever done, and I genuinely cannot tell which. Why not both? Cooper found himself laughing too, caught up in the absurdity. My sister would be so disappointed in me right now. She's always saying I need to live more, take risks, be spontaneous. But I don't think get drunk during an emergency lockdown is what she had in mind. You have a sister? 2, actually, Emma and Sarah. Both of them are chaos incarnate. Emma's a pilot for one of the racing circuits near Neptune. Sarah runs a restaurant on Titan that has a waiting list 3 months long. He felt the familiar mix of pride and inadequacy that came with thinking about them. They're both brilliant and successful and completely baffled by why I chose to inventory cargo for a living. Are you close? We used to be. Now we send messages every few weeks and pretend that counts as staying in touch. Cooper rotated his cup, watching the liquid catch the amber emergency lighting. I keep meaning to visit, but there's always another job, another route, another reason to stay away. I think part of me is afraid they'll realize I'm not nearly as interesting as they are. Hazel's hand found his shoulder, warm and solid. I think you're plenty interesting. You know the access codes to emergency lockers and organize music by middle names and argue about gravity like it personally offended you. That's not ordinary. That's specific. Specific is always more interesting than ordinary. Is that engineer philosophy? That's 3 years of therapy and one very patient counselor on a space station near Proxima Centauri. She pulled her hand back, but the warmth remained. After the whole most beautiful woman in the galaxy thing started following me around, I needed someone to remind me that I was still a person and not just a collection of other people's projections. Did it help? Sometimes. Other times I color code my socks and consider it a victory. She refilled both their cups with the last of the bottle. Your sisters sound terrifying, by the way. In a good way. They absolutely are. Emma once flew through a debris field on a dare. Sarah got into a fist fight with a health inspector who tried to shut down her restaurant over a technicality. They're both completely fearless. He accepted the cup from her. I am the boring one who reads instruction manuals for fun and takes 3 days to make decisions. You broke into a cargo container and stole whiskey within 5 seconds of me suggesting it. I don't think boring people do that. That was coercion. You used your extensive whiskey knowledge to lower my defenses. I merely provided information. You made the choice. Hazel raised her cup. To making questionable choices during emergency situations? To expensive whiskey and terrible ideas, Cooper added, and they clinked their cups together with the solemnity of people participating in a ritual they just invented. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the ship's background hum and the occasional creak of adjusting metal. Cooper felt pleasantly untethered from his usual anxiety, that constant low-level worry that he was doing everything slightly wrong. Hazel had shifted closer at some point, her shoulder now definitely touching his, and he was aware of every point of contact with the intensity of someone who'd forgotten what casual, physical affection felt like. "Can I tell you something?" Hazel said quietly. "And you can't laugh. I promise nothing, but I'll try. When I first saw you arguing with Captain Drexel in the mess hall, I thought you were the most refreshingly genuine person I'd seen in months. Everyone else on this ship either ignores me completely or acts like I'm going to shatter if they talk to me normally. But you were so focused on being right about the gravity that you didn't even notice I was there. It was wonderful." Cooper processed this information through the pleasant fog in his brain. "I definitely noticed you were there. I just pretended not to because I assumed you'd think I was weird for caring about .03 gravitational variance. I thought you were weird. That's why I liked it. I memorized the crew rotation schedule so I'd know when you were in the engine room, and I could avoid walking past it like some kind of creep." Hazel burst out laughing. "I rerouted through the cargo bays twice a week, hoping I'd run into you during inventory checks. We're both idiots." "Catastrophically so," she agreed, echoing her words from hours earlier. And there was something in her voice that made Cooper turn to look at her properly. Her violet eyes were bright with whiskey and amusement, and something else he couldn't quite name. One of her long ears twitched slightly, and he realized he'd never seen her this relaxed, this unguarded. The emergency lighting painted shadows across her face that would have made a lesser person look ghoulish, but somehow made her look more real, more present, more undeniably there. "Cooper," she said, and his name in her voice sounded like a question and an answer at the same time. "Yeah? I'm really glad we got locked in here together." "Me too," he said, and meant it with an intensity that would probably terrify him when he was sober. "Me too." The ship hummed around them, indifferent and eternal, carrying them both through the dark toward whatever came next. 6 hours down, 6 hours to go. Cooper thought about efficient engine designs and properly calibrated gravity, and all the ways he'd been avoiding actually living his life, and decided that maybe sometimes the best moments were the unplanned ones. The ones that happened when all your careful systems failed and left you with nothing but stolen whiskey and honest conversation and the warm weight of someone's shoulder against yours. Hour 8 arrived with the kind of clarity that came after the whiskey had worn off enough to think straight, but before the headache set in. They'd found a cache of water pouches in one of the emergency lockers and were taking turns drinking them with the dedication of people determined not to hate themselves in the morning. Cooper's earlier pleasant haze had evolved into something sharper, more focused, like his brain had decided to start paying very close attention to everything Hazel said and did. "I need to tell you something," Hazel said suddenly, setting down her water pouch with enough force to make it crinkle. "And it's going to sound calculated, and maybe it is, but I need you to know anyway." Cooper's stomach did something complicated. "Okay, I knew we could get out." She said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "Not at first, but maybe 3 hours ago. There's a manual override sequence in the maintenance panel behind Locker 6. It requires knowing the emergency engineering codes, which most people don't, but I do because I helped install the updated system last year." The words took a moment to land. 3 hours ago. Give or take, definitely before the whiskey, if that matters. She was looking at him with an expression that was half defiant, half terrified. "The lockdown is legitimate. There is a hull breach in Sector 7, and the AI is following correct protocols. But we're in no actual danger. We could have overridden it and left any time in the last few hours. Cooper sat with this information, watching it rearrange everything that had happened. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was having the first genuine conversation I'd had in 3 years and I didn't want it to end. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. Because the moment we leave this bay, we go back to being crew members who avoid each other in hallways. Because I'm selfish and tired, and I wanted one thing that was just for me. You could have told me, given me the choice. I could have. I should have. I'm telling you now because apparently I have just enough conscience left to feel guilty about it, even if not enough to have done the right thing in the first place. She met his eyes. I'm sorry. If you want to leave right now, I'll show you how to override it. If you want to report me when we get out, I understand. If you want to never speak to me again, Hazel, Cooper interrupted. Stop talking for a second. She stopped, watching him warily. Cooper thought about efficiency and proper protocols and doing things the right way. He thought about his ex, Mira, who'd wanted everything planned and predictable, who'd left because he was too ordinary. He thought about his sisters, who'd tell him to take a risk for once in his careful, calculated life. He thought about the last 8 hours, about whiskey and truth games, and the way Hazel's laugh had made him forget he was supposed to be trapped. I'm not mad, he said finally. You should be. Probably, but I'm not. He shifted to face her more directly. I've spent the last 3 years doing the safe thing, the predictable thing, following protocols, maintaining systems, never taking risks. And yeah, that keeps things running smoothly. But it also means nothing ever changes. Nothing ever surprises me. Nothing ever feels real. Where are you going with this? I'm glad you didn't tell me 3 hours ago. I'm glad we stole the whiskey and played stupid games and sat here talking like the universe wasn't going to start up again the moment we left. He surprised himself with how much he meant it. I'm glad you were selfish. I think I needed someone to make that choice for me. Hazel stared at him. You're either the most understanding person I've ever met, or you're still drunk. Little bit of both, maybe. He leaned back against the container. But here's the thing. I've been avoiding you for 3 weeks because I was afraid you'd think I was boring, or weird, or too caught up in meaningless details. And you've been avoiding me because you were afraid I'd treat you like everyone else does. We've both been so busy protecting ourselves that we almost miss this entirely. This? Whatever this is, this conversation, this moment, this... He gestured between them, unable to find the right words. The thing where I feel like I can tell you about organizing music by middle names, and you won't think I'm broken. You're not broken. You're just specific about things that don't matter to anyone else. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. So am I. So is anyone worth knowing. The ship shuddered again. One of those stress adjustment tremors Hazel had explained hours ago. They both ignored it this time, too focused on the conversation to care about the universe's background noise. How much longer until the automatic lockdown ends? Cooper asked. 4 hours, give or take. The AI will run full diagnostics, confirm the breach is sealed, and atmospheric pressure is stable, then release all emergency locks simultaneously at the 12-hour mark. And we could leave any time we want using the manual override. Any time in the next 4 hours, yes. Cooper thought about this. What happens when we leave? What do you mean? I mean, do we go back to avoiding each other? Pretend this didn't happen? Exchange awkward nods in the corridor and never mention the time we got locked in a cargo bay and drank stolen whiskey? He was surprised by the edge in his voice, the sudden, desperate need to know. Because I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can go back to pretending you're just another crew member after tonight. Hazel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, like she was testing each word before releasing it. The Meridian's Hope docks at Kepler Station in 6 days. There's a colony there, small, maybe 3,000 people. They posted a job listing 3 months ago for someone to manage their environmental systems. They need an engineer who cares about 0.03 variance in gravity settings. Cooper's heart was doing something arrhythmic and possibly medical. You researched this. I research everything, remember? I told myself it was just hypothetical, an emergency exit plan if things got bad enough. but I never had a reason to actually use it. She turned to look at him fully. I might have a reason now. What about your position here? The whole point was to be invisible, to be just another crew member. The point was to escape from being a myth. But maybe I don't need to be invisible to do that. Maybe I just need to be somewhere with someone who sees me as a person first. Her ears twitched slightly. There's a second listing. They need someone for inventory management and logistics. Apparently their current system is chaos, and they want someone detail-oriented enough to fix it. You're offering me a job posting. I'm offering you a choice. We could leave the ship at Kepler, start over somewhere no one knows either of us, build something that isn't based on avoiding each other or pretending we're people we're not. She paused. Or we could leave this bay in 4 hours, go back to our normal lives, and I'll transfer off at the next station. Clean break, no complications. Cooper felt the weight of the decision settle over him like gravity finally calibrating correctly. He thought about Europa Station and its perfect systems and how suffocating perfection had been. He thought about the Meridian's hope and its inefficient engines and off-kilter gravity. He thought about Hazel reading engineering reports out of boredom and color-coding her socks and hiding from a galaxy that wanted her to be a myth instead of a person. 6 days to Kepler Station, he said. 6 days. That's not a lot of time to make this kind of decision. No, Hazel agreed, it's not. But we could spend those 6 days figuring out if this, she gestured between them, is just cargo bay madness or something that works in normal gravity too. And if it doesn't work, then we have a slightly awkward week and part ways at the station. You stay with the ship, I take the job. We become a weird story we tell other people about that time we were trapped together. She smiled, but there was uncertainty behind it. But if it does work, then we jump, Cooper finished. Leave the ship. Take jobs on a colony we've never seen. Start completely over. Terrifying, right? Absolutely. He reached out and took her hand, feeling her fingers curl around his. Let's do it. Hour 12 approached like a deadline, both wanted and dreaded. Cooper and Hazel had spent the last 4 hours in a state of almost manic planning, pulling up station schematics on Hazel's datapad, which had mysteriously regained partial signal around hour 9, and mapping out a future that felt simultaneously concrete and completely impossible. They'd returned the whiskey bottle to its container, resealed it with Cooper's override key, and arranged the padding so perfectly that no one would ever know they'd been there. We should probably look like we've been suffering, Hazel said, examining her reflection in the polished surface of a cryo container. We've been trapped for 12 hours. People will expect us to be disheveled and traumatized. I am disheveled. My hair has reached new levels of chaos. Cooper ran his hand through it, making it worse. And I'm definitely traumatized by the realization that I'm about to quit my job and move to a colony I've only seen in datapad photos. The photos are very nice. They have trees. Real ones, not hydroponics. That's what you're leading with? Trees? I like trees. On Thessia Prime, we had these massive things with silver bark that would chime in the wind. I haven't seen a real tree in 4 years. She was pacing now, nervous energy crackling off her. What if this is the worst decision we've ever made? What if we get to Kepler and realize we have nothing in common outside of emergency lockdowns and stolen alcohol? Then we'll have an awkward 6 months and move on. People survive worse. Cooper caught her hand as she paced past, pulling her to a stop. But what if it works? What if we get there and you fix their environmental systems and I organize their inventory and we have actual trees and nobody cares about myths or gravity settings or any of it? That's optimistic. You're not usually optimistic. I'm evolving, personal growth. It's very uncomfortable. He squeezed her hand. Look, I've spent 3 years playing it safe and being miserable. You've spent 3 years hiding and being invisible. Maybe it's time we both tried something different. Something terrifying. All the best things are terrifying. That's how you know they matter. The ship's AI chose that moment to speak, its voice cutting through the cargo bay with mechanical precision. Hull breach sealed. Atmospheric integrity restored. Emergency lockdown will disengage in T-2 minutes. Please proceed to your assigned stations for post-emergency debriefing. They both stared at the doors that had kept them contained for 12 hours. 2 minutes until they opened. 2 minutes until the universe started moving again. Cooper felt Hazel's hand tighten around his. "We don't have to use the override," she said quietly. "We can just wait. Let it happen naturally." "Where's the manual panel?" "Behind locker 6. But Cooper..." "Show me." She led him to the panel, a nondescript metal plate that looked like part of the wall, until she pressed 3 specific points in sequence. It swung open, revealing a keypad and a series of switches that meant nothing to Cooper, but clearly made perfect sense to Hazel. Her fingers hovered over the controls. "If we do this, we're choosing to leave together. Right now. Making that decision consciously instead of letting the AI make it for us." Her violet eyes searched his face. "Are you sure?" Cooper thought about his sisters, who would absolutely lose their minds when he told them. He thought about Captain Drexel, who'd be furious about losing 2 crew members mid-route. He thought about his carefully organized life, his predictable routines, all the ways he'd been playing it safe. Then he thought about Hazel explaining engine inefficiencies with the passion of someone who genuinely cared, about her laugh echoing off metal walls, about the way she'd looked at him like he was interesting instead of ordinary. "I'm sure," he said, "but I think we should wait." She pulled her hand back from the panel. "Wait. 2 minutes. We wait the 2 minutes, let the doors open like they're supposed to, and then we walk out together. Not because we had to stay, but because we chose to see this through to the end." He checked his chronometer. 90 seconds now. Hazel closed the panel, and they walked back to the center of the cargo bay. The space that had felt enormous 12 hours ago now seemed intimate, familiar, like they'd somehow claimed it in the time they'd been trapped. Cooper could see the exact spot where they'd sat against the vegetable container, the faint scuff marks from his pacing, the locker where they'd found the water pouches. 60 seconds, Hazel said, reading her own chronometer. "I should probably tell you that I'm completely terrified." "Good, me too. If we weren't terrified, it would mean we didn't understand what we were doing." "I'm also excited. Is that normal?" "I think excited and terrified are basically the same emotion, pointed in different directions." She laughed, that same bright sound that had surprised him hours ago. "I'm going to miss this ship, the terrible gravity, the inefficient engines, all of it. We can visit, come back in a few years and complain about how they still haven't fixed anything." 30 seconds. They stood facing the doors, hands linked between them. Cooper could hear his heartbeat, loud and insistent, competing with the ship's ambient hum. Somewhere in Sector 7, the hull breach had been sealed by repair drones working with mechanical efficiency. The AI had run its diagnostics, confirmed everything was safe, and was now preparing to release its grip on the emergency protocols. 20 seconds, Hazel whispered. "Cooper?" "Yeah. Thank you for being weird about gravity. Thank you for color-coding your socks." 10 seconds. The hydraulic systems engaged with a sound like the ship taking a breath. The massive steel bolts began to retract, sliding back into their housings with precise mechanical choreography. Emergency lighting shifted from amber back to standard white, making them both blink against the sudden brightness. 5 seconds. Cooper tightened his grip on Hazel's hand. She squeezed back, and he felt the tremor in her fingers that matched his own. The doors began to move, splitting apart with the slow inevitability of tectonic plates, revealing the corridor beyond. Normal light. Normal gravity. Normal life waiting to resume. 0, they said together. The doors locked open with a final metallic clang. The corridor was empty. Most of the crew would be at their debriefing stations, following protocol. Cooper and Hazel stood at the threshold, neither moving, both acutely aware that this was the moment everything changed. "So," Hazel said, "we walk out of here, go to our quarters, pack our things, and spend the next 6 days pretending to be normal crew members while secretly planning our escape to Kepler Station." "That's the plan." "It's a terrible plan." "All the best plans are terrible. That's how you know they're worth doing." Cooper stepped forward, pulling her gently with him. They crossed the threshold together, leaving the cargo bay behind. The corridor felt too bright, too normal, too much like a return to reality after 12 hours of existing outside regular time. But Hazel's hand was still in his, warm and solid and real, and that made it bearable. "I should probably go write my resignation letter," Cooper said. "Make it official." I should check the engines. Make sure nothing exploded while I was gone. Hazel didn't let go of his hand. 6 days. 6 days, he confirmed. Then trees and terrible decisions and whatever comes after. I'm already composing the message to my sister in my head. Remember how you said I should be more spontaneous? I'm quitting my job and moving to a colony with someone I met 12 hours ago. How's that for spontaneous? Cooper grinned. My sisters are going to think I've lost my mind. Emma will probably throw a party. Sarah will demand to meet you immediately and interrogate you about your intentions. Your sisters sound wonderful and terrifying. They absolutely are. They reached the junction where the corridor split. His quarters to the left, hers to the right, the engine room straight ahead. The moment to separate, to return to their individual lives for 6 more days before burning them both down and starting over. Hazel turned to face him, still holding his hand. This is real, right? We're actually doing this? I didn't imagine the last 12 hours in some kind of oxygen deprivation hallucination. If you did, I'm having the same hallucination, which seems statistically unlikely. Cooper pulled her closer, just slightly, testing the boundaries of this new thing between them. We're doing this. We're jumping. Together. Together. She kissed him then, quick and sure, like sealing a contract or making a promise. When she pulled back, she was smiling in a way that made her look less like a myth and more like someone who just made the best terrible decision of her life. 6 days, Cooper. Don't change your mind. 6 days, Hazel. You either. She let go of his hand and headed toward the engine room, her gait loose and easy, like she'd shed some weight she'd been carrying. Cooper watched her go, then turned toward his own quarters, already mentally cataloging what he'd need to pack, what he could leave behind, what kind of person he wanted to be on the other side of this choice. The ship hummed around him, steady and familiar, carrying them all through the dark toward Kepler Station and whatever waited there. Cooper thought about efficiency and proper protocols and all the ways he'd been living half a life in the name of safety. Then he thought about trees with silver bark that chimed in the wind, about a woman who read engineering reports for fun, about the possibility that sometimes the best things happen when all your careful systems failed. He smiled to himself and went to write his resignation letter, feeling for the first time in 3 years like he was moving toward something, instead of just away from everything else. The cargo bay doors sealed behind them, ready for the next emergency, the next lockdown, the next 2 people who might get trapped together and decide to change their entire lives.